Exactly.
Jonathan, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I'd like to take it a step back and just think of all the crazy initiatives over the years and decades that we've had in education. First of all, they got rid of the grammar schools, because apparently it was giving some kids a better opportunity than others. Well, as far as I'm concerned, if you've got talent, then you should go to an elite facility. If you're a great footballer, you'll get into the Chelsea training squad for kids, and so on. That was the first thing. The second thing, we had these secondary modern schools. Now, I happen to know a lot of teachers and ex-teachers, and they absolutely decry the secondary modern system because it bunched the bright ones with the less bright ones, and I'm telling you, it doesn't work. We know it. The facts speak for themselves. Thirdly, we had the tendency where they weren't even teaching. It was all about discussion and helping kids to think and consider. You know what? Fine in later education, but not in primary school. In primary school, they need to learn to read, they need to learn to write, and they need to add up. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then we had, for 13 years, we had massive wage increases in teaching. Up until 2010, the change of government. And on the one hand, you say, well, they had to have, because they're professionals. Well, hold on a minute. Why is it that after 13 years of massive salary increases, primary school head teachers earning total packages, salary and pensions and whatnot, of nearly £100,000, and yet the OECD, the global organisation, just told us last week how rubbish our performance has been in getting the kids to actually learn some stuff. So, is the answer that some bloke with a knighthood should say this is how it should be done? Frankly, I'm not convinced, because to me, he and his crowd sound incredibly bureaucratic. I am to work in a heavily regulated profession as well.
You do?
And I understand what bureaucracy is. And the thing about bureaucracies is they all feed on themselves. They all make themselves bigger and bigger. And Tess touched on it. If you could just drive the initiatives, as it were, down to the school level, even to the classroom level, let the professionals get on with it. Stop banging down on them on this target and that target. Look what targets did to the NHS. Clearly, we've had great problems in the NHS, and the same thing has happened with education.
Just briefly on this, Sir Michael Wilshaw says that classrooms must be orderly places. You were talking about your kids in the swimming pool, Tess. What is the simplest way of bringing order to a room full of children?
It's to engage them. That's the secret. I must say that, I agree with some of what you said, Jonathan, but I think that, most primary school teachers don't earn anything like £100,000.
Including pension and all the benefits. It's getting on for that.
Well, I don't think it is particularly near that, but...
I know it is.
Well, I think it depends. You'd have to define pensions in an interesting way.
Yep,
but anyway...
Let's assume you're both right.
One thing, for example, that we've learned from the improvements of schools in the London area is that one thing that has driven this improvement in standards is exactly the sort of touchy-feely things that you seem to be suggesting don't help. And I think they very much do help children. So questioning, children talking to each other and questioning and listening to each other, that's what's driven the improvements in these schools.
If that's the case, why were we told last week that the OECD said that English schools were so way... Yeah, we're so way down the table. We were way behind most of the European countries. We were a mile behind the likes of Singapore, which is so far advanced because they're actually learning to read, write, and add up numbers.
Well, I think a lot of the problems are with secondary schools rather than with primary for a start. And I think that the questioning and, for example, things like philosophy for children, which are absolutely not in the line of the 3 R's, are very much on the touchy-feely end of the spectrum, really do help children become engaged in the subject and have knowledge all around the subject.
9-year-olds?
9-year-olds, absolutely.
All right.
You see it in a class. You go to a class where they take I don't know if you've ever done it, where they're doing a philosophy for children session, and you will see the response is really quite remarkable. Really is. 9-year-olds, not just 9-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 6-year-olds. It's honestly, it's quite something. But I don't know what you think, but I personally think that the standard of education, especially in primary schools now, in secondary schools, the problem is that it's so completely divided. It's actually just very hard to talk about secondary school education in this country because it's so divided between good and bad. But it's much less divided in the primary school sector. And I think that primary school education now is infinitely better than, for example, when I was at school.
Hold that thought, both of you. We're going to come back to that, I'm sure, with some reactions from you at home. 0207 224 2000. Just before we get to the headlines at 11:30, I just want to bring in one brief thing before we come back to your topics, which I'd love to get your comments on. This is the news that one of the bosses in Tesco, he's the food resourcing director, told this House of Lords inquiry that customers were at fault in terms of food waste. Sarah says, on veg, I grow my own and love that I can have a courgette to plate to mouth in 10 minutes. But what I have never understood is why people say that the markets and supermarkets across Europe always display their fruit and veg in all shapes and sizes and still make them look tantalising, but the supermarkets don't do the same over here. What do you make of that? Because there is this view that we want perfect everything because that's what we're used to. But she's right. When you go to other parts of Europe, you hardly recognise a pepper as a pepper because they don't look anything like the ones here. Did you think it is our fault, Jonathan?
I think the big grocery chains responded entirely appropriately because they're businesses, they're hardly charities, to what they were seeing with the customers. A few decades ago, they saw that when the fresh foods were laid out in pretty patterns and they were aesthetically pleasing, they sold more. Having said that, though, we find that some ridiculous, ugly percentages of fresh foods are being thrown away by these retail chains because they haven't sold them. Now, that to me, I say ugly because, my goodness, there are billions of people around the world starving, and yet we in this country aren't even buying the food that's laid out very easily for us to get.
Many thousands of tonnes thrown away from one supermarket alone. But because I just want to get Tess's view before we get to the headlines. Tess, do you think it is our fault? Are we in the same way that Jonathan is saying, are we too enamoured with beautiful fruit that we won't touch ugly fruit? Well ugly fruit is a fruit, isn't it? But generically ugly fruit.
I try never to buy fruit or vegetables in supermarkets. I try to buy it from markets. You get so much more value for money. The market stalls these days that have bowls of things that cost £1, and they have three, sometimes 4 aubergines for £1, and I go to Sainsbury's and they're marketed there for an 80p or £1 each. You get so much better value in markets. But if I do ever need to buy them in supermarkets, without exception, every single time I will buy the basic value range, and that is where they put the odd misshapen carrots and so forth, because it's just madness. It's just madness.
Thank you very much, Lee, so far. We'll keep that debate coming. 0207 224 2000. Tess Reid and Jonathan Davis, by the end of the half hour that we have to go, will hopefully have solved the financial crisis this country is in. And if not, we'll want to know why. We may find out why. Maybe there's no solution to it at all. But it is the Simon Lederman Show, BBC London 94.9, exactly 11:30. And Valley Fontaine has the headlines.
Thanks, Simon. Lloyds Banking Group has apologised after it was fined a record £28 million for putting staff under intense pressure to sell financial products, even if customers didn't need them. The city regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, says that between 2010 and 2012, some staff faced the loss of half their pay if they didn't meet their sales targets. The jury at the inquest into the death of Mark Duggan, whose killing sparked widespread riots in England in the summer of 2011, has retired to consider its verdict. The father of four was shot by police marksmen who stopped the taxi he was travelling in Tottenham. The jurors have been told they may consider a conclusion of unlawful killing alongside other possibilities. Meanwhile, around 2,000 students have taken part in a rowdy demonstration in central London against what they claim is police brutality and about deaths involving the police, including that of Mark Duggan. And in football, Arsenal qualified for the Champions League knockout stages as Group F runners-up, despite losing to Napoli. But Borussia Dortmund's dramatic late 2-1 win in Marseille saw them go through as winners of Group F ahead of Arsenal and pushed Napoli into third place. And London's weather dry but cold overnight with stubborn mist and fog patches. Tomorrow, early mist and fog should gradually lift, otherwise mainly dry with limited brighter spells and a high of 11 degrees Celsius. That's 52 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the headlines. There'll be a full update at midnight.
This is BBC London 94.9.
Is there one way, a best way to deal with bad behaviour in schools?
No, I'm not. Well, yes, consistency.
BBC London 94.9 Breakfast.
Is bad behaviour getting worse in classrooms?
I think it's getting worse, yes.
If we see a teacher that's actually really passionate about the subject, then we get really engaged as well.
Weekdays from 6.
You're a danger to others and a mystery to yourself.
But I'm not a teenager and I'm still a danger to others and a mystery to myself.
A bit of a mystery to me as well.
BBC London 94.9 Breakfast.
Looking at the old school, he was a little bit sort of withered and rough around the edges.
And the staff, of course, some of them are not very withered and rough around the edges.
But not your head teacher.
Weekdays from 6. Call 020 722 42000.
Text 81333. Start your message with the word London.
BBC London 94.9.
Simon Lederman Show, BBC London 94.9 0207 224 2000. Dan says, regarding what many of you were talking about in the last half hour, I say many of you, both of you, Jonathan Davis and Tess Reid, about the standard of education and what can be done with discipline. This is the comments of Sir Michael Wilshaw. Dan Davis on the Twitter says, if the UK had reported London schools separately in the OECD survey, as China did with Shanghai, then London would have been at the top, he thinks.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Yeah.
On the email, simon@bbc.co.uk, this is David who says, this is how capitalism works in the USA. He's copied and pasted something from an article, which he's also quoted the source of as well. The top 1% have enjoyed the benefits of rising corporate profits and stock prices. 95% of the income gains reported since 2009 have gone to the top 1%. So 95% of profits gone to the top 1%.
That is absolutely the case, and that's the point. It's not capitalism. There's no way on earth that in capitalism we would have bailed out those banks to that extent. To coin the phrase, capitalism without bankruptcy is like Christianity without hell. So we needed, in fact, to have let...
Is that not your phrase? That's a very good phrase.
Oh, there's no copyright on it.
Very good.
Don't a lot of people believe in Christianity without hell?
They're Jewish, like me. That's the Jews. We have the best of everything.
No, I'm pretty sure Christians believe in hell.
I think a lot these days don't. But anyway, we digress. You go on.
The fact is, the banks have totally taken over. It's quite remarkable what they've done. It's a bloodless coup. They've created this situation where they're too big to fail, so the politicians are terrified and the central banks are terrified of letting them fail. Actually, that's the reason why we have experienced for a few years low to no growth. The fact that we're having a little bit of growth now, well, clearly is because there's an election more or less around the corner. But we are close to being in a generational depression.
For our listeners,
if they continue to bail out these banks year after year, we're in a depression.
For our listeners, I mean, there are many things they'll be concerned about. If they're of a certain age wanting to get a pension, they'll be worried about annuity rates and rates on savings. If they're desperately struggling to find somewhere to live, they'll be worried about the price of rents and, of course, property as well. There are people who deny we're in a housing bubble, others who say we're definitely in a housing bubble. Rents seem to be going up and up with no logical ceiling. What do you sense for real listeners who have genuine concerns about their financial stability for their families? What is their plight likely to be?
Well, in fact, I just wrote a piece that what we're experiencing since a few years ago and going forward for the next generation is that there will be, it's already happening, a largely diminishing middle class. By the next 20 years from now, the middle class will be no more than a half the size that it is today. There'll be a much bigger poor class. And we have now, and it will be bigger, an emerging sub-poor class. No income and no assets. It's that dire.
Uniquely to this country? Or?
No, God, no. It's right across the developed world. And unless and until, and I don't expect it to happen because it's politically untenable, unless and until we bring back capitalism, which we've had so rarely in the West in the last 100 years, we're never going to get rid of the massive inequality that we've created and which continues and will continue for the next 20 years.
Didn't capitalism change because we had to protect people when they fell on hard times?
No, I see that. Well, so you're changing what capitalism is. No. Capitalism, quite simply, is in the 70s, they should not have bailed out British Leyland. In the 80s, they should have not bailed out the mines because they were inefficient. They were losing money hand over fist. In the 2000s, they should not have bailed out the banks. So what do we have? What do we had? We had 20, 30 years ago, we had socialism for the poor. Now we've got socialism for the rich, paid for by everyone else, and God knows, the next generation. I think I've said to you in the past, it's gone way beyond borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. We're now borrowing from Peter's son to pay Peter. It's outrageous.
And just before we get Tess's reaction, just briefly, because one of the reasons why we were talking about this is because of this article about this housing bubble. Just briefly explain what the prospect is, according to the article.
Well, in this case, an economics professor from Warwick University has said that we're in a housing bubble. And the politicians in the Bank of England are very clever in the words that they use. What they say is, we do not see a new housing bubble emerging. And you know what? I'd agree with that. Because it's the same housing bubble that we've had for the last 10 years. There was a bit of a prick of the bubble in 2008. London, for example, went down 20%, but came straight back up again when A, they bailed out the banks, and B, they slashed interest rates to almost the lowest possible. Well, that was 4.5 years ago. So the outlook is that house prices are absolutely ginormous in relation to incomes, which of course are flat or falling. Taxes are rising, the cost of living is rising. The outlook for house prices for the next year or two is probably steady state to growth. But beyond the election, we can actually reasonably expect a major external shock to come from outside of the UK, and I think it's going to be bigger than 2008. And the one thing, of course, they won't be able to do to get us out of that mess is slash interest rates.
Tess.
Okay, well, I know where you're coming from when you're comparing capitalism in the different eras and bailing out British Leyland and so forth, but banks, we all know, occupy an entirely different place in the economy, and they occupy a pivotal role in the economy. And it's not just about them being very big, which of course they are, which is part of the point, but that's not the whole point. The point is also that they are vital interconnectors in the absolute nexus heart of the economy. And so you could say, if you let a car company go bust, what do you lose? You lose your manufacturing of cars and you lose the jobs. If you let a bank go bust, you have a world of pain. And that is why we had to save the banks.
I'm